Hey everyone, it's Tanya Williams here, author of A Child-Free Happily Ever After. And I am very happy and lucky to be talking to Veronica Morland today about her experiences and her choice to be child-free. So welcome, Veronica.
Hi Tanya, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, what is the weather like in your part of the world today?
So I'm coming to you from Sydney CBD today, and it's cold but sunny. So yeah.
There you go. Well, it's a beautiful sunny day here in Brisbane, and I'm so happy that winter is behind us. Finally, I hate the cold. So so bring on summer, I say.
Lovely. Yeah, I was in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago actually, and it was just beautiful. So much nicer.
Yeah, we are pretty lucky. I always complain about being cold, but then I sort of think, well, it's not too bad. I'm just a big sook, really. So cool. Okay, so let's dive into the child-free conversation. Before we sort of get started, what I'd love to do is for you to share your experience with people in terms of what your situation is and why you've chosen to be child-free, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, sure. So gosh, it's like, where do I start? It's interesting because for me, the whole premise of being child-free, and I do agree with you, I think that choice is absolutely at the centre of this conversation about whether you have children or not. Yeah. But for me, it's always been a matter of, well, I never really had an urge to have children. So it was never even really, it's never even really sort of come up as a huge sort of choice for me, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it is one of those things where I guess, always, particularly other women will tell you, oh, well, just wait, the clock will start ticking, or you'll meet the right man, you want to give him children, or things like that. And so I've always sort of, tottered through life sort of thinking that at some point this, biological clock is going to drop, and all of a sudden I'm going to go baby mad, and, I'm going to really want that. But I guess as I've gotten older and older, and I'm 29 now, so I'm kind of at that peak age where people are really, sort of like tapping the wrist, tying the knot and settling down and that kind of thing. But I very much feel like my passions and my direction are going in a totally different way. So I guess that's sort of where I'm at in terms of being child-free.
Yeah, it's probably very similar to me. I never felt I had to make the decision because I just never wanted children. It wasn't a decision as such. It was just like something that I was like, I just don't want that. So it's interesting that some women feel that, and some women just like, nah, not for me, all the way through their life.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think that, I have some very dear friends who have children, and they've always, well, not all of them always, but, they've sort of come to this spot where it is a very dear wish of theirs. And I think they sort of approach motherhood with this dedication and this passion. And I love that. I love seeing that. I think it's so fantastic. But it's so interesting to me that, I think there is a whole other group of women out there whose voices are just starting to be heard a bit more, who either don't want to have children and decide not to, or who don't want to have children and do end up doing so because of social pressure or pressure from parents. And, we're starting to see more and more of those stories of people actually saying, well, I had children, I love my children so much, but I do have some regrets about that because ultimately it wasn't because it came from me. So I just always make sure that I'm living truthfully to, I guess, that lack of an urge to have children, because I think it's a monumental to make.
Oh, of course. I mean, it's such a massive thing in your life, right? It's a lifelong commitment. It's, it's not something that you take lightly by any means. And I know when I was writing the book and I was having these conversations with so many different women, hearing the experiences that people had from whether they were child-free by choice, by circumstance, whether they were mums, and even some of the mums that had regretted that, as you sort of mentioned before. It's just like, well, it's not that they don't love their kids any less, just that they went, you know what, if I did it all over again, I don't think I'd do this because, God damn, it's hard and I don't think I'm made out for it. But what I find really disheartening and really disturbing is the fact that if they say that out loud, people just, oh, you're a monster and what a horrible person you are and how could you? And it's just like, well, hang on a minute. It is such a massive thing. It's not right for everybody. It doesn't mean that they're a bad mother by saying that they might regret a decision. But there's just so much condemnation and criticism around a lot of this stuff now. And that's exactly why I'm doing this is to try and change that conversation, to go from being, you know, from criticising and judging women to going, well, I'm going to support you whatever you want and whatever you need. And that's why I think it's really important to have these types of conversations.
I agree. And I guess I'm really keen to see a shift, particularly in, you know, I guess I sort of come from a corporate/legal background. And, you know, it was interesting even there where women are so, you know, like powerful, intelligent, you know, fulfilling this breadwinner role, which is so new when we think about it. Like, you know, from the 1950s to now, like what a huge social change. And yet the conversations about those women are still sort of weirdly stuck in this past era where women are only, you know, like our primary role was childbearing and child raising. And it's been quite disheartening for me to see in that context, like working in a law firm, which I left sort of relatively recently. But, you know, seeing these women who were working incredible hours and making incredible impact in their role, but still getting, you know, these behind their back kind of speculative conversations about, oh, but is she home to see her kids? Oh, but is she I heard she was working up until she gave birth. And, you know, this conversations that would never, ever happen about men. Really, exactly. A double standard. It
is.
So, I mean, I would love to see that shift to where we just accept women, whether they have children or not, or whether they choose to take on a primary care role with their children, or whether their partner does that. So,
it's interesting. I'm glad you brought up things from a career perspective, because I literally had a conversation with someone yesterday and we're talking about women lawyers in particular, and I had a different conversation with someone who's a CEO, and we were talking about, she said, you know what, she said, I have so many women say to me, you know, I don't know if I want children yet. I'm still trying to figure that out, because they're reaching that, you know, they're in their 30s, and obviously people are having comments and saying things, and they're like, well, I just don't know yet. And so there's nowhere for them to really go, or for anyone for them to talk to, because they can't really have a lot of those conversations at work. And unless they have child-free friends, you know, the mothers are all going, oh, but you have to have a child, and then, you know, obviously they've got stuff happening at work, and it's not really something you talk to HR about. Did you find for you, or for any of the other women that you might work with in that space, that there is really nowhere for them to go and have those conversations?
I'm not sure. Like, I think it still is considered in, you know, it's this weird sort of double bind, because in some ways it's still so stigmatized that I don't think anyone really talks about it very openly. But then there's also this other side of it where other people are so keen to just jump on and have a chat and speculate about why or why not you may be choosing to have kids or not. So I think it is something that is still very private. And I think it is so difficult. It's actually quite problematic that people could be having these conversations without you necessarily consenting to them or being involved, because, you know, you may be working in that environment and trying to conceive and finding that it's not possible. Like, the people who are chatting about whether or not you're a mum don't necessarily know if you're facing, you know,
exactly right,
physiological barriers to it, or if it's, you know, your own personal choice. I mean, either way, I think it should be sort of up to the individual, but no, it's certainly not something that I've found that's openly discussed by the person themselves. Only very discussed about them.
And that's exactly, you know, what's wrong. As you said, it needs to be a different conversation, because there is things that you can say to someone who's child-free that is socially acceptable, but if you said that exact same thing to someone who was pregnant or a mother, that would be, oh, horrified. You can't say that. It's so, well, it's okay for them to say that to me, so why can't I say the same thing to them? They're very different conversations, and that's where, you know, it's these two different standards.
You could never say to somebody who's pregnant, nor should you, that, you know, their life will be, you know, something, and just like assume that.
Oh my God, you regret that. Can you imagine saying that to a pregnant person?
Exactly. You can definitely say that to somebody who's, you know, not jumping on the bandwagon to have children, as it were.
Yeah.
It's
have you felt pressure from, I suppose, anyone around you, whether it be from a work perspective, whether it be from you know, friends or anyone in your sort of network or circle over the years, and they're like, you should do this, you should do this, like, you know, like and there's a pressure to do it? Have you experienced that in any way, shape or form?
I'm quite lucky that I haven't experienced much pressure to have children. So it's certainly not something that's ever come from my family. I don't have a mum or dad who's going, oh, I want grandkids. Like, they very much leave, you know, my personal life up to me as a choice, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I think probably the closest thing that has given me pressure is a relationship that I was in sort of for the last 6 years, not my current relationship, but the previous one, where I was with a guy who was significantly older than me. He was 12 years older. And it became very clear very early on in our relationship that he really wanted to have children. He felt that his time to be a father was running out, and it was always a very long-held goal. He loved kids. He would have been a great dad. But I was very young when we started out. I was 22, 23. And so it was quite interesting because I kind of went from this space where, because I was so young, whenever anybody asked you if you want to have kids, it was sort of so far down the track that you didn't even really like think about it. You're like, oh yeah, maybe one day. Like, and then all of a sudden it kind of brought this question home to roost in a real, like a very visceral, real kind of way. Like, do I want to have kids? Like, what does that look like? And I just want to make it very clear that he never pressured me to have children. So to his credit, although it was definitely something where we realised we weren't aligned on it, he was like, you can't do that by halves, because kids know, they know, they realise, you know, they need to pull in, or, you know. So that was quite interesting, and I had some discussions with my mum around that time that really helped me. And I think that this is something that you're also trying to do, is like opening up these honest discussions of, well, like, what does motherhood actually really look like? What does it really entail? Not this kind of like, you know, or just do it because it's the trodden path. Like, actually, how does that fit into your life? And so, you know, my mum was so great. She was like, look, on the plus side, so great to have kids when you're young because you've got more energy. So, like, on the other side, you've got to be so sure that your partner's like there and going to be in it with you and all that kind of thing. And just like chatting to her in a real way about what motherhood actually looks like probably helped to push me further down the path of actually thinking, I don't really see this fitting in with who I am as a person or what I want to do. Like, you know, the things I was thinking about just didn't feel like they were landing right with me. So that's probably the closest it's come to feeling some kind of pressure to do that. Just because I wanted to explore it for the sake of the relationship, but ultimately it wasn't what I wanted to do. The relationship ended for other reasons in any case. So I've been quite lucky.
I think you certainly have, not to have, I suppose, that pressure. I know I've always been very mindful of who I surround myself with, and if I've had people in my life like that, then they haven't lasted very long because I don't want people around me who aren't going to support my life choices just the same as I support their life choices. And I think there shouldn't be two different standards or two different playing fields. It should be, well, hang on, you know, a friend is a friend regardless of, you know, the decisions you make, and that you need to be there for the other women in your life and so forth. In terms of, I suppose, things that you're passionate about and things that you want in your life, like if you can see yourself in 10, 20 years time, what are the types of things that you want to be doing? And I suppose, especially being child free, that maybe you wouldn't be able to do those things if you had children as well.
Yeah, so this is kind of all something that's just unfolding for me now, because I left my legal career in December last year.
Oh, that's very new. Yeah.
Yeah, it is very new. I mean, it's already September. How? But time flies. Yeah, so I guess I now have a bit more time and headspace to think about what, I left my legal career because I knew it wasn't ultimately what I was passionate about doing.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to figure out what that is, and I don't quite know yet. But I'm very entrepreneurial, and I love sort of running my own show and doing my own businesses and things like that. So I can kind of see that in my future, which I think, people say their businesses are their babies in some ways. Like you do sort of pour so much into them, and they're so much created from yourself. So I think I can see that. I can see a lot of travel in my future, which isn't impossible with children, but certainly obviously a lot more difficult to do.
Yeah. And more expensive. Like when you've got to pay for children on top of everything else,
Yeah, that's right. And I think ultimately for me, I love mentoring. I do, that was one of my favorite parts of my job, was mentoring younger lawyers than me. And I can definitely see myself doing some kind of mentorship, or even foster parenting or things like that. That feels more naturally me than, I don't know, just sort of the usual path or whatever it is. Yeah.
Okay. So if you could give someone perhaps that was going through this decision, who is unsure whether they want to have kids or not have kids, if you give them one or two pieces of advice, what would they be?
I think my main piece of advice is that when it comes to a decision that involves literally making a life, you have to be fiercely honest with yourself about your reasons for doing that. And I think it does, I think if your reasons for doing or not doing that are coming from anything other than right here, then you've got to put those to one side and really just get honest with yourself and do the right thing for you.
Yeah.
It is all about choice. It's your life. You just get one life. Like you have to, you have to do what's right for you. Block out all the other voices and just move forward in honesty.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with that sentiment, and I think I know in the second half of my book, I go through some ways that help people to figure that out. But that brutal honesty and having those hard conversations, because they can be quite hard if you've got if you've got a partner that is on a different level to you in terms of that. I mean, I was always lucky. We had that conversation well and truly before we got married. But I hear so many women who say, oh, yeah, we didn't really. And then one partner wants a child, the other one doesn't. And then the woman's either pressured into it or the relationship splits, which obviously causes lots of other issues. But even the conversations with family, so with mothers and with sisters and with friends and so forth, where for women, I mean, I'm lucky. I'm very strong and independent, and I've always been good at saying what I think and standing up for myself. But I think there's a lot of women out there who struggle to do that, and don't have that strength and aren't as confident in having that voice. And I think that's the thing, is it's about really finding, going deep, as you've mentioned. Really, it has to come from the heart. Have those hard conversations, and don't be afraid to have a voice around it and share, your own thoughts. And that's, I think, where a lot of women are struggling with now, is going, well, I don't know how to tell someone that I don't want this for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult because we've never before in history really had this conversation. Like it's never been the done thing to not have children for women.
Yeah.
So it's totally understandable that people can't find the words to have those conversations, especially when when it's family pressure or, even just social pressure at large. That's enough. Even if you don't have a particular voice in your ear telling you to have kids. You've got so many messages. I mean, gosh, can you imagine if they put a woman on The Bachelor Australia who didn't want to have children? She'd be cut instantly. Like, it's so taboo. Yeah. And it's kind of like you said, like, saying that you don't want to have children, just, it shouldn't be a shameful thing. It's not shameful. It's not selfish. It doesn't mean that you hate mums or think that all women should not have children. Like, there's so many assumptions that are drawn from it that, just blows my mind. Like,
I know. I'm totally with you there. And it's like a social faux pas. It's like, oh, what's wrong with you? Like, how can you not want to have children? And there must be something wrong. And what is it? And I think people want to be able to put you in a box or label you. And if you go against the norm, then I can't quite figure you out. And therefore it's a bit like, okay, well, they're a bit strange or odd, or they're selfish. And that's the one thing that I always have a big issue with is when people say, oh, well, you don't have kids, so therefore you're selfish. And it's like, I'm sorry, but how does that make me selfish for living the life that I want? Because it's my life, it's no one else's. But then you're not selfish for choosing to have children. I don't think selfish comes into either of those conversations, and I just wish people would stop saying, oh, you're selfish. It's like, well, actually, no, it's my life. I only get one, as you said. Like, why?
And it is so judgmental and illogical. You could just as easily characterize having children as being selfish for environmental reasons, social reasons. You know, you can get into whole philosophical territory about whether life is a good. You know, you can do that, and I don't do that because, you know, I think to each their own, and support in their choices, especially ones as fundamental as having or not having children.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, this I suppose stereotype or this assumption that, you know, a woman's role is to have children is really perpetuated by the media. And you look at your magazine covers and TV shows, and there's always, you know, a woman who, you know, I was watching The Backup Plan a few weeks ago, and I was like, this is really interesting. I mean, obviously she wanted a child desperately, and all the stuff that was happening, just going, wow, and they're making this assumption that that's what every woman wants. So many of these movies that we see come out of Hollywood and the TV shows, and it's just like, I'd love to see more content around child-free women and what that looks like and what their lives look like. And I'm really looking forward to the documentary that Trixie Films are making called A Not So Selfish Life, which is not going to come out until the end of 2019, I think. But just having, you know, this different conversation, this different view, I think coming to the mainstream is going to do wonders in terms of trying to change the conversations that are happening out there. And I think in media in particular need to be very mindful of how they speak to women and how they portray women in the media. And there's got to be a shift in that.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, I guess the media has a huge, huge role. And it's nice to see that it's sort of slowly infiltrating into, you know, some representations of women.
Yeah.
I just finished binge watching this show called Unreal on Stan, which is all about reality TV producers. And there's some, you know, like, it's an interesting show, but it does sort of have some portrayals of female characters who are in their late 30s and are sort of experiencing all of this pressure around having children or not, and, you know, and whether or not it's for them and that kind of thing. So slowly creeping in, but I agree that just walk past a tabloid shelf and you'll see that every celebrity under the sun might be showing a baby bump.
Oh, yeah. Don't you hate that?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, like, I mean, Jennifer Aniston being the perfect example of, you know, having to write this open letter just saying, guys, like, back off. You're like perpetuating this huge, huge problematic discussion about women.
Yeah.
And you're really, like, minimizing what we can do. Oh my goodness, we're 50% of the population and we are so much more than our reproductive capacity.
Oh my God, yes. I mean, there's like, well, you know, the stats are close to 1 in 4 women are now choosing not to have children. So that says it all, really. It's like, well, come on, like there's a reason why women are making these choices, because for the first time in a long time, we can say, no, that's not for me. And I think, yeah, I think for some people that's really challenging and they just don't quite understand how to work around that.
Yeah, yep, I agree. I think anything new is scary, and that's totally understandable. But I
Yeah.
guess, yeah, all I would say, if anybody's watching this who's struggling to understand why some people might choose to be child-free, just like have an open conversation about it. Like, don't rush to conclusions and don't sort of believe everything you see and read. Like, not every woman who chooses not to have children and to hole herself up in a mansion of luxury goods is Cruella de Vil. Like, like we're not all going to be these old spinsters. We're going to be like, you know, the cool aunties. We're going to be running businesses. We're going to be contributing to society in so many other ways other than motherhood. And we're going to be supporting mothers. Like, of course. Yeah.
I love everything that you've just said, Veronica.
Oh, thanks, Tanya. I love everything that you're doing. It just resonates so strongly.
Thank you.
I must admit, I was like hugely nervous about doing this and putting my position out so publicly because it's so stigmatized. It's not something that I would generally tend to share, but it feels important to do that.
And I love the fact that you have been a bit vulnerable in sharing that story. And I think the more women that do this, and this is why I'm having these conversations, is because the more of us that say, hey, this is my experience and this is how I feel, and we're not, you know, crazy, as you said, Cruella de Vil's or you know, we're just normal women. We're just living our life in a slightly different way, and that's okay. And we don't hate kids, or I know that there are some child-free women who do, but, you know, most of us are, you know, as you said, great aunties, and we're involved in children in some way, whether it's mentoring, whether it's teaching or whatever it might be. And we need to start to change this conversation in society, and that's the whole point of me doing this. So thank you very, very much for taking the time and coming and chatting to me. I've really enjoyed it. I've loved everything you've said. And hopefully as more and more of us have this conversation, we can share this out to the world and start to change that dialogue together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you, and I wish you all the very best with your events and your book and everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Veronica, and no doubt we will hopefully talk again at some point in the future.
Sounds good. Let's keep in touch.
Definitely. Thanks.
Right.
Bye.